Right. Well, I do have a PowerPoint because I'm stereotypical professor here. But I'm coming in just to give you some tips on resumes, but please feel free to ask me questions in the chat or just say something and to let me know if you have a specific question throughout. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, and you all can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
It's a very lovely PowerPoint here. All right, so just today, I'm gonna go over the basics of a resume. So the different components, some common issues to avoid, and just some general tips on what to actually include. Anytime you're doing a resume, you do want to get feedback either from like an advisor, going to the career advising center, even just asking someone else to look it over is really important. So first, I just want to know, I'm going to look over here to see if you could raise your hand to tell me if you've actually done a resume before. Nice. So most of you have done a resume before. So this isn't hopefully not going to be too new to you on what a resume actually is. And we're going to talk about a resume versus a CV, which is another term you might hear when you're applying to jobs. So what I do want to ask everyone is in the text box, can you tell me what would you include on your resume? What's supposed to be included on there? A piece of information. Yeah, definitely your contact information. Yeah, so I would always put your contact information using an email and that should be a professional email. I see education. You should include your education. Does anyone know, do you include your high school resume? Like if you were going to put your education, would you actually put your high school information right now? No, right? That isn't something, but I think that's a new thing for some people. I definitely didn't know that until like my third year in college, that you don't put your high school anymore. I'm also putting relevant coursework. I would say you can include that now. Once you get out into the job field, you usually don't include that as much. And any type of relevant coursework, it should be actually relevant to that job. You can have like a running list, and I definitely recommend having like a big document. You have all of your skills in there, but it should be tailored. You don't want to include stuff that's just not relevant. Other things, work experience, and we could talk about this, but usually you have different sections for experience. It could be volunteer experience, it could be professional experience, it could be research experience. It's kind of depending on the job that you're actually applying for. An objective, I don't personally include an objective. I think sometimes when you go to the advising center, they do recommend this. And we do see those for students sometimes, but I don't generally actually put a bio or an objective on my resumes normally because you only have a page, so there's not too much room on there. And you can put things like awards or leadership too, depending on the job. And references depend. I see someone said references. That really just depends on whether or not they asked you somewhere else for your references. If they did, I would not include it on your resume. So it sounds like a lot of you do know a lot of information that you're gonna put on there. So the basic components are usually you put your name and your full name. If you've had another name, sometimes people will put it in parentheses, especially if it shows up on one of your transcripts, for example, if you changed your name. You can do that. And then usually at least your email address and then a phone number. I don't think it's always necessary to put your mailing address anymore. I still do, but I usually put my work address there. And then you're going to do education and training. And we're going to look at what that looks like, your different levels of experience. You might put skills, but again, like it's all about like, is this actually relevant to the job I'm applying for, because some of your skills like might not matter at all to what you're doing. And then certifications, again, depends on the job, and awards and accomplishments if it's relevant to it. So how about like, what would I not include? What is something like you probably don't want to include on your resume? Yeah, experiences that are not relevant. Anyone else thinking like what's something you may have heard someone, random clubs, outdated information? Yeah, eventually, this might be the case for some, but like there are stuff that because I'm some amount of years old, there is stuff I don't include because it's from so long ago that it's not really relevant. And some people have looked at like if it's like 5 years out versus 10 years. Yes, I don't normally suggest you put your GPA unless it's almost perfect or they require it. So some people will say like you have to have your GPA on there. Otherwise, I wouldn't put it. Interest in hobbies, you will hear this from if you look online or even in some advising centers. They recommend that. I don't personally put that or think it's very relevant, but that you'll kind of get conflicting information at. Other things you might not think about is I've actually seen people like put photos of themselves. You definitely don't want to do that. I've actually I've seen people put that like they're married, like a personal information that they have kids, like that stuff we're not even supposed to know about when we're thinking about a job. So don't include any of that type of information. So you all were pretty on the ball about this, but any unnecessary information, so like skills or classes or certifications, if they're not relevant to the job, I wouldn't include them. Keeping in mind that you can be very creative in the way that you describe. Like, for example, I worked at Cold Stove Creamery when I was in college and I was a supervisor. So for a while, I actually put that because I, helped manage different employees and that type of thing. I don't put it anymore. But I didn't talk about how I like scooped ice cream in that, although that was a great part of the job. So that's kind of thinking about like, what do I really need to know? High school information, and again, like GPA, I probably wouldn't include it unless you have like a 4.0 or like a 3.9, just because it's not necessary. So I have this beautiful resume that a former public health student club member sent me to give you kind of an example. I'm not sure if it's big enough, but she said I can also share it with you all if anyone's interested in seeing an example here. So up at the top here, she clearly has her name bolded. And that's true for most resume designs, is that you bold the name at the top. And you'll notice she doesn't actually put her address, which I don't think the mailing address is always necessary, but she has her cell phone number, and then she uses her educational email here. That's really up to you. Like, so if you're going to be graduating this quarter or something, you might want to put your Gmail or another one and make sure it is like my Gmail is just my name, Gmail. I've had some other emails from before that I probably would not have used. And then she has her education. And what you'll notice is she does put, and I would recommend this too, is what she's currently doing is above. So she's doing a master's of public health right now. And on the right, clearly it says where it's at and expected graduation. And then down here, I personally usually would just put when I got the date, when I received the degree, but she also put from when she started to stopping. And then it clearly says like where it was at and the degree they received. And something interesting you can do is she did put some of her activities here underneath, but she also has a section, so you wouldn't really need both of these. So if you wanted to highlight leadership, if, for example, if it was for a position where you're going to be supervising, you might want to do a whole entire leadership versus just putting down here. And then she has her experience here, and she does like a really good job of really like upselling her what she did in her position. So like her current one, she uses words like spearheaded this analysis. So she's like leading that analysis. She talks about coordinating the program, using like some really key terms here. And then for some of you, how many people are doing, raise your hand if you're doing like research with a faculty member. So what you will find is a lot of students do it over time, and it might be through like a independent study or volunteer or a Frost program, or you're getting paid. My recommendation, it would just be called like a research assistant position, even if you're transitioning between the different positions. So for example, if you were like last summer, you were a Frost student, but then you continue doing an independent study, I would put the entire time period and just call it something that could go across. So like call it a research assistantship that was in the department. And then she also does put skills here, but I would say like down here, she puts like SPSS, which is statistical software. So if you were applying to a job that needed data analysis, I might put that. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't. So that's an example of, I think this is pretty well put together in that it highlights the different sections. She's bolded things and clearly kind of marked the dates and the locations. So does anyone know though, before we move on, how many people have heard of a CV? Does anyone know the difference between a resume and a CV? How about an easier one? Does anyone know just between a resume and a cover letter?
Yeah. I'm in the club. It's fine. It's fine. No come.
Yeah, so Anna is right that a resume is usually more selective in experiences, and that's generally for most jobs what you're going to submit. A CV is much longer. You don't even want to see it. My CV is ridiculous. It's like a lot of pages and it's way too much information that you put on there. And a cover letter kind of expands on specifically, and I see you all have gotten that, expanding on like your interest and how what you've done really relates to their job. So I just tell you the CV thing because sometimes if you're applying to an educational or a research-based organization, they actually might ask for a CV. And these are usually, I think it's actually nicer because you don't have to worry about doing one page, to be honest. But it's very expanded in like everything that you've done. It usually has your education, any type of training, any type of awards that you've got, your publications, presentations, things that you generally don't include as much on in your resume. And then the cover letter, like I said, this is definitely like on your resume, you definitely want to try to highlight what they're looking for. But then in the cover letter, that's where you kind of say like, I'm a good fit for this job because I have this experience and I want to do this, this, and that. And that's how it directly links to this job description. So some basics when it comes to resumes, the first thing I would remember is that they're probably gonna look a lot of resumes. So you don't want to do anything that's going to annoy them. You want it to be like as clear and concise as possible. So normally they restrict it to one page. As you go on with your career, sometimes you can also do two, but usually you're going to put the relevant experience. I'd make very simple headers that clearly stick out and it's in a consistent format. And I'd also try to use keywords, and it's okay to like go to, I don't even think they really notice it unless you're really obvious about it. If you go to the job description, you can like pull out specific words and then put that into your resume, not copying and pasting. It's a different thing. But if they talk about like having data analysis, you can like specifically use the terminology data analysis in your resume and your cover letter. Having like a readable font is important. I have looked at resumes that are like in pink, like in gigantic font, way too small font. It's better to make it like, so someone doesn't look at it and go, oh my God, why am I reading this right now? I don't want to look at this. So you want it to make it as easy as possible for them to go through it. Some common issues that I have seen, saving it with a name that is not professional. I would say this is also related to assignments for you all, but anyways, definitely just make sure, consider that a lot of the times, like, so when I get a job application on the Cal Poly portal, I can see the file name you actually used. So just keep that in mind. You can even just say that as like resume, your last name. And another thing related to that is sometimes we actually download, depending on what you're doing, we might be downloading a bunch of them at once, right? So if it's already with your name, it can make it actually easier, but that's not that big of a deal. Just don't make it unprofessional. Making sure you're using a name that's, email that's professional is important as well. And then I cannot overemphasize, just have someone else read it so you don't have any typos, because that's just something, honestly, they're looking for reasons, not because they get so many, they're looking for reasons to put your resume aside. And that's kind of just the reality. There's lots of jobs out there, but if you have a lot of typos or there's like weird font, that's probably going to be something they're just going to like pull it aside and think, oh, this is not a professional resume. Oh, and I did not say this in the other one. You definitely don't want to put salary information or like nicknames that you have. That's not appropriate in this situation. So I do want to go over with you some examples, because the biggest thing is like, in your experiences, how do you describe what you do? You want to really try to highlight what you've done in a way that matches what they're looking for, if you can. So you can have a job that you might use different descriptions just based on where you're applying. So, so if they were looking at like including relevant skills, wait. Oh yeah, make sure that it matches up. So I'm going to give you some examples here, and then I'm going to ask you all to think about what you might say too. So this first one is they could say, I have strong experience in health education and health promotion programs. I did copy and paste this from somewhere. So as a volunteer with a public health club or a member, you could say provided health education during community events, such as Quit Day and Public Health Day in different areas of health. So in this, I've said that I provided direct health education. I did it at different events that were in the community. And I did it in different content areas too. So this is highlighting different things in it. Of course, you can expand on this in your cover letter. All right, so I want you all to think about like a job that you've done. If someone said, be a proven manager with skills in directing plans and operations, what kind of jobs do you think you could list here and talk about in your resume?
I think as a student doing research here, you could say during your like research assistantship, you provided direction and communicated with team members on projects.
Yes, Jen, I think that's a great example. You could also say, so she was talking about being a research assistant and that maybe you're doing direct communication, helping plan different parts of the research program. And then in your cover letter, you could expand on exactly what you did. Another thing too, I've seen with students is that they help train another student as a research assistant that came in. So that could be another thing that you would say is that, or that you actually helped for your senior project, lead one of the projects. Volunteer coordinator, club leadership is definitely a good one for if you're in a club and you're doing a leadership program. I think that's actually my example. So you could specifically say that you helped with, or you led the coordination of all the club meetings. I think Nadia, you might say something like that. Or you could maybe say you helped coordinate with community partners to come speak at club meetings on various topics. That could be another one. Another example here, I see volleyball coach. I think, yes. So if you haven't done any, I would always go towards it's specific to the area. So public health or medical, what clinical, whatever you're applying for. But if you haven't had the opportunity to do that within that field, talking about being a volleyball coach would be an example of that. When I was talking about being a supervisor at Cold Stone Creamery, that's another example, right? And I would just probably read it, I would say more broadly, like Danielle's given a good example here that like you helped direct team practices on a regular basis. How about this? Be able to run basic statistics. How might you try to put this on your resume to get at this specific one? Awesome. So I'm getting a lot of good examples here. So this would be a good opportunity, like some of you have said, to talk about relevant classes here. So you could specifically put introduction to statistics or introduction to linear regression. I would actually, I know you can put the prefixes, but I would probably put the description of the course there, right? Because they're not in your necessarily Cal Poly aware, but like some of you had said, you can also put in your skills that you've used SAS or SPSS or JUMP or R. The only thing I would say, and I didn't see this in Synonyms, but the one I showed you, but I would say like SPSS statistical software, just because there's so many softwares, it'd be important to make sure they know that that was a statistical software that they use. Same with if like you were doing qualitative analysis, or you're making surveys through like Qualtrics, you might say like Qualtrics survey software. So they're aware of what software you're specifically talking about. And yeah, the best thing here would be if you've had experience. So perhaps you ran statistical analysis for one of your research positions. That would be an example of that. But you can also in your cover letter go into that you have done that in your classes if you need to. So those are just some examples to try to pull it out. And again, try to make it short, but to the point of what you did, and then you can expand on it in the cover letter. The most important thing, I think, is to make sure you have someone else read it beforehand. I cannot overstress this point, just to make sure there's like it consistently looks nice and that you're not missing a period or you misspelled a word, or like honestly sometimes after you've looked at it so many times you don't even realize there's this random line across it that you didn't see until someone else looked at it. So I think that's definitely one of the most important things to do. So that was a pretty brief overview of what I would tell students about their resume. What I would say is that you're always welcome to go to your advisor to have them look over your resume, to ask them questions about going on interviews. And of course, the advising center is another area for that. Does anyone have any other questions that I didn't maybe answer?
I have a question. So would it be possible to like combine a section for certifications and awards? Like, for example, Dean's List and then like a certification in some like research course?
Yes, you could do one that was like award/certifications. And the other thing is you could put that as a bullet underneath your education too. It depends on how much you want to highlight it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yep.
So should we never include high school experiences, or if something is like particularly relevant to the job or like to who you are or like something like that, is it okay to include it?
It depends on how far back it is. So if you're applying for a job and it's your first or second year, I have had students that like they worked in a doctor's office and they're applying for clinical positions and that's their most relevant experience. I think that's fine. I would say like once you're out of college, you probably will not want to include them anymore.
I'm not sure if we touched on this, but I've seen sometimes before, like you can put like community service on like your resumes. Should we do that, or should just that be kept to a minimum?
So I tend to try to get students to be, I'm not gonna say sneaky, but I tend to like put experience and then like, even if it's a volunteer experience, put it underneath experience, unless they specifically ask you to say what's paid and unpaid. But you can, and I like I had this too. I had like you can do a volunteer experience too, if you need to do that separate.
Like something like a note taker, where would that like be on your resume, or would that not necessarily be relevant for anything?
A note taker
Because
for
it's volunteer. Yeah.
So it depends on like, yeah, it depends on like, so maybe if you were going to be like, you're applying for some type of assistant position, for example, or like it was even like service work where you have to work with other people, you know, you could talk about how you coordinated with the DRC center to help take notes and do that. You could put that under experience. I would just write it the right way. Like I wouldn't say I just took notes. I might say like I coordinated directly with the our Disabilities Resource Center to take thorough notes for students in need or something like that.
Okay, thank you. That helps a lot.
Any other questions?
I have a question about the bullet points. I heard it was good to like quantify what you did. Do you have any advice on that?
Yes, if it is like multiple things, I would agree with that. So if you were saying, I don't know, if you graded for 4 different courses, I probably would quantify that. Or if I received like 3 different awards, or let me think of another example. If you were doing like doing presentations, oral presentations, like as a research assistant, you could say that like you published 2 peer-reviewed journals and helped present at 3 national conferences, because that sounds better than just saying national conferences. I'm trying to think if those are probably where I would do that. And in your cover letter too, you can go into specifics that you've done it more than once and you have different examples.
What are some like general headers you would start with on your resume?
I would do, and I am happy to share Sanam's, Nadia, if you want to send that out.
Yeah,
I would definitely have like your name bolded at the top. That should be the biggest thing. So like, oh, I see, it's Danielle right there. And then education, experience, and then it kind of just depends on what else. It could be skills, could be another one. Those are the general ones that I know that's really broad, but that's generally like, I make sure you have education and experience on there. And you can do things like, you could do like research experience and practical experience if you have that.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. I know you mentioned the like last name thing, and so like my legal last name is like different than like my preferred. Would I just like put that in parentheses on the top next to my name, or where would I say that?
So I would probably, I would probably put what legally would, especially if you have to turn in transcripts or get a reference, they're going to be calling it references. I would probably put it in parentheses. So they know that you go by both these names would match up with you.
Cool. Thank you.
And also on that note, it might be important to tell your references to let them know that, like, I don't know, I feel like some people do like go by their middle name, for example, so people know them by that, to let them know that you're applying to jobs and just, hey, by the way, my name is listed like this. So if they call and they ask specifically about that, that's who they're referring to. Oh, how about references? Like, how do you know how to put someone on a reference? Like, how do you do you have to tell someone that you're listing them as a reference? Yeah, I would definitely want to know. I have had it where people have called me and I'm like, who? Oh, yes. What I would do is let them know that you're applying to jobs and ask them if it's okay. And then it's really helpful if you like attach your resume and then like briefly describe what you're applying for. So that way, if they call you or send me an email, like I can go back and look at their resume real quick and then remember like, oh, this is what they're specifically wanting to do. So I'm going to try to talk about that there. Any other questions?
If you're listing like relevant coursework, would you just put that under the education part, like underneath the whatever college that you took the class in?
That depends on what it was about. Like if it was a position that like really emphasized statistics, I might consider actually doing a separate header called relevant coursework.
Okay.
But if you were just like, well, I'm applying, to be on the Pulse education team, so I'm going to make sure I list like that I took introduction to public health and these that are relevant, I might more likely put it as a bullet under education.
Would that be something that'd be good to expand on in a cover letter?
If you think it's going to help your case. Or you could even say like in the introduction, you're like, based on my prior coursework, and you could put like IG this, and then my practical experience, I believe I'm the best qualified, that kind of thing. You could just briefly mention it too. On coursework projects, I think I would probably put that under experience and try to expand on it. If you've done something like actually developed something like I know some of you in 299 you make surveys. So you could actually say like developed a survey on Qualtrics survey software that had open-ended and closed-ended items. I would probably, if I was going to list it on the resume, I'd still put it under experience. And then but I might be more likely to actually write that in my cover letter.
If the relevant coursework is, say, like you took it at like Foothill, would you make like a separate item or column for that education location?
That's a good question. In that case, I probably just make a separate header and call it relevant coursework, so I wouldn't have to worry about where it was. But that's a good point. I probably wouldn't put it under Cal. Well, technically, you transferred it to Cal Poly. But I might just get around that by not mentioning it and just putting relevant coursework.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and you don't actually, that's a good thing to just bring up, like you don't actually have to put that you got credits from a community college underneath there, just so you know. I mean, if they ask for your transcripts, that's when you provide that. But I also took classes at community college and I didn't list it anywhere. It was just put my main degree.
If we got a degree at community college, should we list that there?
Yes, I would. There is some like questions of like, no, I would probably still put it. So if you got like an associate's degree, for example, sometimes people, like if you then got like a higher level degree, you might not list it. But right now I definitely would list it.
All right, thank you.
And that actually is an interesting point about like, all of you, when you go to list your names, you have a BS, right? You'll have a B, I think everyone in here is, well, maybe a couple of you, I don't know. So you might have a BS behind it, which is a funny abbreviation, but I also have it. But what you'll notice, like if you go get a medical degree, like a nursing degree or an MPH or PhD, you actually stop listing the BS.
Thank you.
If we're applying to a position like right now, like I'm a first year, I'm not going to put like I have a degree in public health. Do I list my major as public health or do I just leave that out completely?
No, definitely put it. Yeah, so
Okay, thank
you'll
you.
put like, and I'll send Nadia the example one so you can see. But basically you're gonna put California, like our university name, and then you'll put your expected graduation. And I would definitely put a bachelor's of science in public health. It's really up to you if you want to put your concentration. I didn't, I don't think I listed mine personally, but if it's pretty relevant to what you're applying to, maybe you would. If you have a minor too, that's another one. You can determine if you want to list it or not.
I was also planning on taking the certified health education specialist exam. Would that go under education or would that go under skills?
I would put that under, either make one that says training or certifications. And I would put that under, I would definitely list that. And that's an example of something you would actually put after your name too, when you're like writing, right? You would be Irma BS, comma, Ches.
Thank you.
The only other thing I would say is, again, if you have like gaps, even like, so, you know, I know a lot of you don't do stuff, maybe you're doing something else during the summer, but like you come back and continue a position. And in the actual application, they might make you be very specific, but I would just put like June to June the next year. I wouldn't like stop it and go. It always looks nicer too if you like, you just put that continual. Sometimes I even just put the year, but maybe that's not that good to do.
If you did research with different professors, or like, I know that you said like if you did Frost and then like independent study, but what if it was with like a different professor? Would you still put that under just research, like your research experience, like as one big chunk?
Yeah, I would just call it research assistant and put it under the department. You can put the department name or and the university, and then just describe the different things you did within it. And then in your cover letter, you can say that you worked with 2 different faculty, but just for the sake of making it seem like it looks much better, right, than one quarter. I don't know how many years I've been here, I still think semester, but it looks better to do it for like a full year versus just putting a quarter and then another quarter. Plus it's going to take up a lot of room in your resume.
And if one, let's say that like, because Frost, normally students get a stipend and like typical research, most students don't get stipends. So if it was like half internship, half not, how would you like go about like putting that in there, or would you just not put it in at all?
You can, I don't know if Snom did this in hers because she has that same situation, but you can say like received the Frost Fellowship Award to fund my participation in.
Okay, thank you.
That's definitely something I would do. It looks nice to get awards. You could also put it under an awards category too. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
So how comfortable do you need to be with a software to be able to list it as one of your skills? Like I took a class in SAS, but I don't feel like I'm a master at SAS.
So I feel comfortable enough if they asked you to use it, you can use it. However, what you can do is put SAS parentheses beginner. But I definitely do not, like, I think you should always talk yourself up, but definitely don't put anything that, like, if they asked you, okay, now I actually want you to use it, you definitely don't want to do that. Like, I would say, like, I would not put that I speak Spanish, even though I took 4 years of Spanish, because like no one wants to see that happen. It's gonna be good on my resume. But you can put beginner, like if they just say like they want introductory, or at least they might say like, or at least familiarity with that, they might put that, then you could say that.
When it comes to Microsoft Office, like PowerPoint, Word, Excel, I know that like some companies really like if you like know how to use that package, but that's also pretty common for everyone to know how to use it. So like, would you just list that, or would you just not want to?
That's an interesting, I used to be, yeah, you'd want to list it. But I honestly probably wouldn't list it unless they asked about it, especially if maybe if they asked about like data management. Like if you knew how to use Microsoft Access, that's one that's like more difficult to use that I might put. If you know how to use like Adobe Photoshop, that kind of thing, I think is still more higher level that I would still list. I know that's a roundabout question, but probably not unless they asked about it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? You're definitely welcome to, oh, Irma, you got another question?
Yeah, sorry. If we have a CNA license, where would that go? Or should we not even list that?
Oh, you should. I would. I would put that under certifications. And I would definitely put that,
Okay, thank you.
especially if it's health related. If anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to email your advisor, but you're also always welcome to email me too. If it's even no question is silly, it's better to ask me than turn in that resume that you weren't so sure about. And I'm always happy to look over resumes too. But I think that's all I have.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dr. Alver, for coming and giving us all your wisdom. I will send out Sanam's resume and maybe even the PowerPoint. If you could send that to me, that'd be great for people who couldn't make it. We also recorded it, so we could probably post it somewhere for people to watch as well. But yeah, thank you so much. Okay, that is also the end of our meeting. Thank you all for coming so much. We will send an email out for our next meeting, which will be next week on Monday. Or next week's a long weekend. Wait, we'll send an email about it. We'll send an email about it. Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Alvin.
You.